Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our service of worship on 4th of July weekend. We want to welcome especially those who may be visiting for the first time. Do we have any first-time visitors venturing it out on a holiday weekend? Oh, wonderful. Glad you joined us. And if you're new to us, and we invite you to be our guest for lunch for our UU Cafe, and you can get a ticket to that effect at the welcoming desk out in the lobby if you haven't gotten that as yet. And for those new to us, if you haven't filled out a visitor's card yet, the blue card and the pews are also, they may be found at the welcoming desk. Please do that, and we'll send our congregational newsletter on to you. And know that you're welcome to all of the events that we have here at Shelter Rock. Yesterday we had, I think, a very moving memorial service for someone who was 97 years old, who had been a member here since 1963. And along with his wife Norma, was such a spark plug in this congregation. So we hold up the memory of this gentleman who gave so much to our congregation. And his name was, you all remember Harvey Cohn. Carol and I, my wife and I, were at his 95th birthday celebration a few years ago, and he said to all of us, mark down on your calendar 5 years hence for my 100th, and he was working for it. I visited him, and he mentioned that he was hoping to reach 100. He made over half of that time to 100 from his 95th. But we had a wonderful celebration of his life here yesterday. President of our congregation, president of our Beach Board of Governors at one point, and working for establishing our Hadley House. And now, as is our custom, let's greet our neighbor, those sitting close to us today, and warm welcome. As we meet this morning for worship, we join in a common quest for the discovery of life's deeper meanings, for the enduring strength of hope, for the inspiration of joy and laughter, for the mind's illumination by the torch of wisdom, for a renewed understanding and appreciation of our country's heritage of freedom, and for hearts warmed by the mysteries of love and souls enriched by the winds of the living spirit of this community. And now we light our chalice. Grateful for the enlightening gifts of knowledge and reason that creation has bestowed upon us, and mindful not only of the promise of these gifts, but also of the responsibilities that these gifts entail. Let this light rekindle in us a wonder and love for that which is only partly understood. So may it be. Let us join together in singing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land. Please stand in body or spirit. justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. You know, I appreciate it so much when Evan moves from the piano, which is his instrument, to the organ, which is not, so we hear that glorious instrument from time to time. Thank you so much, Evan. We appreciate it. Let us join together in our words of affirmation as found in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. This do we affirm and covenant with each other. Seated.
Good morning. And thank you so much, Blythe, for that beautiful rendering of my favorite patriotic hymn. I thought we would celebrate our nation's birthday with arguably the words of our greatest president. I think both political parties, both major parties, concur about that. Would you turn with me to the words of Lincoln, number 586 in the gray hymnal, and read the italicized portions. I'll read the other. The idea of democracy, 586. As labor is the common burden of our race, so the effort of some to shift their share of burden onto the shoulders of others is the great durable curse of the race. This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this to the extent of the difference is no democracy. Destroy this spirit, and we have planted the seeds of despotism at our own doors. Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in the world?
Freely have we received of so many gifts that minister to the needs of body and spirit, and now we have the opportunity to bring a portion of that bounty to our congregation to support its wide and worthy concerns. We wait upon you now for the offering of the morning. Each of us has our own way of entering into meditation and prayer and becoming centered. I ask you now to become still and to reflect on the content of your lives. For the fullness of life, which blesses us with bounty and beauty and unexpected gifts, we give thanks. And we lift to awareness those events which have enriched our lives in the past week, those events and gifts for which we are grateful. For beloved friends, colleagues, members of our families who bring love into our lives, we give thanks. And we lift to awareness the names and faces of loved ones for whom we have concerns, both near and far away. As we see their faces, may we discover how our lives may intersect with theirs more creatively. Some of us have suffered disappointments during this past week. We may be in pain. We may be downcast in spirit. We may be anxious, perhaps troubled over difficult decisions. We may be regretting deeds done and those left undone. We may be angry at ourselves or others. We lift to awareness our very personal yearnings and desires and needs. May we be opened once again to the graciousness of life, renewed in hope, forgiving ourselves and others. May we be sustained in health and reconciled to one another and restored in spirit, so we may realize the goodness, the richness, and the glory of life. Amen.
I was standing in the Washington, D.C. Mall, and it was the 4th of July. The year was 1975, and we were listening to a military band playing one patriotic selection and march after another, each more exciting than the last. I say we were standing and listening because next to me on that occasion was Paul Johnson, as in the Paul Johnson, the senior minister of this congregation for the past 14 years. Paul has alluded to this experience in one of his sermons in the past. You see, I was listening, Paul. We were working that summer at our denominational Washington office for social concern. It was dusk, and the gray of the evening was yielding to charcoal gray, and as that color began to be pretty close to black, the band launched into my favorite John Philip Sousa march, Stars and Stripes Forever. As long as I'm not playing the piccolo part, I'll take Herb Waldron for that. The last rousing note of that rousing piece sounded forth, and suddenly pink, crimson, gold, and red explosions began to blazon the sky. I have never before or since been more ecstatic at a 4th of July celebration. Paul later told me he felt pretty euphoric as well. And I realized a major reason for my jubilation was in no small part because the long Vietnam-Cambodia War was finally over. Brave men and women from this country were no longer dying or being maimed in that far-off area. And untold numbers of Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians were no longer being killed by orders of our government. As well, we were in the shadow of the statue of arguably America's greatest president, whose words we read together today, Abraham Lincoln, the man whose decisions ultimately meant freedom for millions of people from the unconscionable scourge of slavery. And we were at the site of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famed "I Have a Dream" speech that he delivered 12 years earlier. Somehow, the greatest and best of this country's heritage was on display that night, along with the music and the fireworks. But I was a little surprised at myself. I regarded myself then as now, not only as an American, but as a citizen of the world. I believe every human life is of much supreme importance as every other. Each night a child is born is a holy night. That's what Sophia Laia Faz, the Unitarian religious education writer, leader, said, including this child. Whether that child be American, Greek, Chinese, African, Middle Eastern, or otherwise. I love the bumper sticker, "God bless the whole world, no exceptions." Of course, it doesn't scan very well for an Irving Berlin song. But I still regard the United Nations as the greatest organization humanity has ever created. When I was president of the board of that office, I had the honor of going to our UU office across from the United Nations headquarters every month and looking at the more than 175 flags of nations of the world waving in the sunshine. Finally, after 2 world wars costing 100 million lives, we had an organization of nations, for all its limitations, which pursues international cooperation, reconciliation, and peacemaking in lieu of exploitation and war. I've appreciated all that Dottie Prunhuber has done to represent this congregation at our United Nations office, By the way, this congregation received an award for its support of that office a week and a half ago at our annual Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. So, how does my internationalism dovetail with love of country, this country? Because I also firmly believe there is no contradiction in appreciating and honoring the diverse nations and peoples of the earth, while at the same time celebrating what is distinctively great in one's own country, in this case, the United States of America. Samuel Johnson told us in the 18th century that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. I guess he's entitled to define words, having published the most influential dictionary in the English language at that point in 1755. Samuel Johnson's phrase has meaning for me, and here is why. People permit themselves to say the most short-sighted, disgusting, hateful, bigoted things and get away with it if their statements are cloaked in patriotic rhetoric. For example, you can make insulting, do any examples come to mind? Insulting comments to and about women, or call Mexicans gangsters and rapists, or say that nobody of the Muslim faith should be allowed into this country, as long as you also say, make America great again. But there's another form of patriotism that is of the scoundrel variety, in my view. I would sum it up as talking the talk without walking the walk. What do I mean? Particularly on holidays such as Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and the 4th of July, people in high places are inclined to speak in grandiose terms about how grateful they are for the men and women in uniform representing this country. But then they won't vote for the most basic and urgent services for those same veterans. Do you know that on any given night, 50,000 veterans in this country are homeless? 51% of these people suffer from physical disabilities. Half suffer from mental illness. 70% are involved with substance abuse. And yet last year, 2015, the United States Congress voted to cut $1.4 billion in veterans' benefits. About half of that money for basic medical services, and the other half for construction jobs specifically designated for veterans. Eliza Doolittle said it, words, 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 I'm so sick of words. Show me some action. And I would like to see the lofty and schmaltzy words accompanied by actual programs that help the veterans of this country and their families. That is why I'm so grateful to Jim Smith of this congregation, chairing United Veterans Beacon House, providing 34 housing locations for vets in Long Island, among other vital services. And to this congregation for voting a large grant of $100,000 this past spring for that purpose. And for all of you who bring clothing to the bin in our closet for veterans and their families. There's an announcement in the order of service about that. That is true patriotism of the non-scoundrel variety. But going on about what I regard as healthy, wholesome patriotism, are there gifts in the American experience that we can properly celebrate without being relegated to the scoundrel corner? I believe the answer is yes. And I will list 4 examples. After all, tomorrow is the 4th of July. The first of these is a first, namely the First Amendment to the Constitution. In particular, I'm talking about freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and more particularly about the freedom to express dissent. Freedom to agree with one's government is fairly universal. In fact, the government wants in almost every country for you to agree with it, whoever is in power. It's freedom to disagree with the government that our founding fathers and mothers wanted to guarantee us. And we can think sometimes, yeah, freedom of speech, fine. But as The Economist magazine pointed out a few weeks ago, only 31% of the world's people live in countries that allow freedom for dissent. Thanks to people like James Madison in the 1780s, who was echoing the Magna Carta and the Glorious Revolution in Britain, and John Milton, we have the right of free speech, free press, along with freedom of religious worship, freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances, as the supreme law of this land. That doesn't mean that the guarantee has always been enforced. People have been ostracized, fired from their jobs, or jailed in this country, and occasionally killed for expressing in spoken word and in writing that which is deemed politically incorrect. Frank Wilkinson, a Unitarian Universalist, a dissenter to Senator Joseph McCarthy, God forgive him, was a First Amendment dissenter and served in prison for a year as his reward. More recently, the Reverend William Barber, the founder of the Moral Monday movement, who was asking to speak to officials about the limitations being posed on voters of color in North Carolina, was arrested for so doing. As Frederick Douglass put it so well, those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are like people who want crops without plowing the ground. I appreciate that this congregation voted to help publish the Pentagon Papers when members of our government wanted that document suppressed from its own citizens. And I too have had the experience of being penalized for exercising the First Amendment. I did not go to prison, but I was dismissed from the University of California by an American professor and administrator for participation in a nonviolent demonstration. The circumstances were that I was in Japan on the university exchange program. That campus was experiencing unrest. There was a student and faculty strike in progress. Authorities brought in the Japanese riot police. A female student was struck so violently by a club of one of those police that she was taken to a hospital in an ambulance. And then our American professor suddenly said we were all to break the strike, register for classes, and furthermore, we were not to express our opinions publicly if we sympathized in any way with those who were part of this strike effort or were victimized by the recent violence. To me, that sudden ruling was unacceptable. It affected my Constitution because it affects the United States Constitution. And so with 5 other students, I decided to protest the denial of free speech by exercising it. And we stood in a peaceful vigil at the school entrance with some signs protesting violence. And we were dismissed from the school. At one point, our professor threatening to call the Japanese riot police on us. And I realized, again, as Michelle Stanistreet of the National Union of Journalists put it, freedom hangs by a thin thread. We eventually were supported by Japanese and American professors and students, my father, who appealed the decision, and I was reinstated in school. But not everybody's so lucky. The steelworkers of the 1890s, when they went to Washington to appeal for better working conditions, faced instead mounted police and violence, ordered by Professor Grover Cleveland. So did an upstate New York school teacher who wore a black armband lose his teaching position for 3 years before reinstatement. What's my point? Free speech and dissent are patriotic. And the price of that freedom is eternal vigilance. Blessings on the First Amendment. Socrates voted for it, or he would have. But I must move on. Second, I am grateful to the American experience for immigration. We are a nation of immigrants with two important qualifications that I'll mention later in a few minutes. To me, it is such a blessing that people from all parts of the world are here to contribute their music, their dance, their clothing, their food, their languages, their humor, their culture to the fabric of this great nation. And it is what makes it a great nation. I once saw a play on Jewish immigration in the late 1880s, The Golden Road it was called. And you may have heard of this story about a certain Jewish immigrant arriving at Ellis Island, and he was told by his friend, you only need to know 2 words, Max Kaplan. When officials start blathering at you, just say Max Kaplan. So he kept repeating that to himself as he was going up the stairs. He said, Max Kaplan, Max Kaplan. Well, the words in Yiddish for I forgot what I was going to say are schön vergessen. So this new Max Kaplan arrives and is face to face with an immigration officer who booms out, name please. And he answers, schön vergessen. And the officer says, Sean Ferguson, welcome to the United States. Next. A lot of Jewish Sean Fergusons in this country. It's not a newsflash that anti-immigration sentiment is at a fever pitch now and has been at various times in our history. We know full well about a certain presidential candidate who wants to build a great wall, a second one at the Mexican border, financed by Mexico, he thinks. And yet, I will add that deportations have reached a record number under President Obama as well. There have been more deportations under the Obama presidency than that of any of his predecessors. You may recall the book, The Death of Jocelyn. It was a group read a few years ago, and of the raid on the Pandy Chinese fast food restaurant, resulting in the arrest of about 20 workers. One of these was the mother of a 4-month-old child. She was not allowed a lawyer. She was not allowed a phone call, even to the babysitter of that child. All the child knew was that mommy wasn't coming home that night, or the next night, or for months. But to those who say we need to remove undocumented people from this country, of whom there are about 11 million, I have these 2 questions. The first is, if they were removed tomorrow, who would be gardening our yards, cleaning our homes, working in the back rooms of restaurants, and harvesting our myriad fruits and vegetables and amber waves of grain? The largest peach grower in this country a few years ago decided, I'm only going to hire people with legal standing. And at the peak harvest season, he needed a little more than 800. Do you know how many he found? 33. There'd be an agricultural disaster if undocumented immigrant labor were to be removed from our economy. And I have a second question. What about your ancestors? Didn't they come to these shores, often fleeing persecution and poverty? And, like my own grandfather's family, who left as Ashkenazi Jews from the Ukraine when pogroms were rife, didn't they find here jobs, housing, education for their children, and hope? People opposed to the current immigration coming in hastily answer, oh yes, but our ancestors came here legally. To me, that's not much of an answer. If there are no legal restrictions against immigration, it's not very difficult to immigrate legally, as Homer Simpson so eloquently puts it. Duh. So, in 1883, a 34-year-old woman wrote the words of the new Colossus, as opposed to the ancient Colossus of Rome. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And we heard these words sung so beautifully by Blythe earlier. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Do you know that Emma Lazarus never knew that those words would be inscribed at the base of the Statue of Liberty? I mentioned there are 2 important qualifications to claiming that we are a country of immigrants, and here they are. The first, as we well know, Africans came to this country for 3 centuries against their will, in chains, to suffer the horrors of American slavery. Then they endured Jim Crow, then the new Jim Crow, where 5% of the world's population in this country has 20% of the world's prisoners. But looking at slavery itself, some years ago, the New Yorker magazine studied the slave trade in this country, and because no marriage records were kept whatsoever for those who were enslaved, children could be separated from their parents, never to see them again. The article concluded ours was the most inhuman institution of slavery in human history. That this population survived was remarkable. But that Black Americans have made the enormous contribution to American society that they have is little short of extraordinary. I just learned about Frances Harper from the Reverend Natalie Fenimore, a 19th century African-American poet, novelist, abolitionist, and Unitarian. And there are also Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Barack Obama, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to name a few. As well, it was African Americans who created what some have said is the one true American art form, namely jazz and the blues. And I'm so appreciative that Evan played Jelly Roll Morton this morning and George Gershwin. In other words, in answer to Walt Whitman, who said, I sing of America, the poet Langston Hughes, who admired Whitman, said, I too am America. And there is another population here who are not immigrants at all, except if one goes back millennia, and that, of course, are the Native Americans of this country. Native Americans in that famous Thanksgiving story, I have felt, are like our UU Service Committee. They help the pilgrims help themselves and survive a horrible winter. Native Americans have given us names like Manhattan and Chicago and Miami and the Poconos, crops like tomatoes, corn, potatoes, salmon. The Iroquois Federation had the idea of a bicameral legislature. And we are only just beginning, after the trail of broken treaties, to appreciate the bounty of many Native American peoples' culture and spiritual gifts. Winter Flower Gibson of this congregation introduced some of us to that one afternoon, and of course the Shinnecocks were here in winter with an art exhibit and a dance program. But a most profound contribution that Native Americans have made to us, I believe, is an attitude toward the environment, which we are all too slowly beginning to appreciate and emulate. That the natural surroundings are not to be subdued and conquered only, but safeguarded and preserved. Humankind has not woven the web of life, said Chief Seattle. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to that web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. That's why these woods are going to be preserved, I hope, for generations to come, much to the appreciation of the red fox, who once in a while can be seen here. Which leads me to a third reason that I appreciate this country, and that is our parks, our system of national parks and wildernesses. The whole idea of a national park began in this world with Yellowstone, and now there are 42 of them. Teddy Roosevelt said when he got to the Grand Canyon, "Leave it as it is. You cannot improve on it. The ages have been at work on it, and human beings," he should have said human beings, "can only mar it." I grew up not far from the California redwoods, some of the oldest and tallest trees in the world. Some of these date from the time of the Roman Empire. The highest are impossible to measure, they're so high, but they're generally between 350 and 400 feet tall. Take about 45 minutes to cut down. I also taught world religions for a while at St. John's University, and we dealt with the word sacred. The redwood forests are sacred. There is no explaining how supremely majestic they are, with their razor-thin multiple sun rays cutting through the red bark and the trees towering into shadows above you. Do you know how many of the old-growth redwoods remain? 3 to 5%. In wildness is the preservation of the earth, said Thoreau. And that means, with climate change, the whole earth. We should, in a way, regard the whole earth as a park, and we fail to preserve it at our peril. But I am grateful for the fourth tradition in the American experience, and that is the American dream. The American dream has sometimes been portrayed as a rags to riches experience where someone in poverty impresses his supervisor, gets a little raise, another raise, another raise, and through pluck and initiative politely becomes a supervisor or an owner. That happens once in a while, just as some people win the lottery once in a while. But it is rather rare. Most people who gain great affluence began with a fair amount of money. And that's not the American dream of which I speak. Realizing the dream of a decent life for yourself and your family has often involved courage, sacrifice, and struggle. It is exemplified by Harriet Tubman, bringing 500 people from slavery to freedom. It is exemplified by the teacher in Harlem who single-handedly led students to an academically exclusive preparatory high school. It was the first time that students from that elementary school in Harlem had been admitted to such a prestigious institution. But it came from the teacher believing in the students. Standing up for the American dream, said Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was exemplified by sitting down at restaurants that wouldn't admit people of color. And the American dream involves the labor movement. Unions have been critiqued as utterly weak and in the past as bastions of corruption, and that has been true in some cases. But labor unions brought us, as the bumper sticker put it, the weekend. They brought us the 8-hour day. They brought an end to child labor. They brought us the requirement that safety exits not be locked in the event of a fire, as occurred at the Diamond Shirtwaist factory in Manhattan. They brought the first contracts in American agricultural history in California, and a victory for the Immokalee tomato workers thanks to Shelter Rock in Florida. They brought a victory for the Verizon workers recently. We are realizing the American dream for millions of people when people band together and insist on it. You cannot, from the very bottom of the valley, by yourself, usually, partake of the American dream without assistance. A child who is hungry cannot learn at school, and 22% of the children in this country are under the poverty line. People cannot partake of the American dream if they are seriously ill. And even though the Affordable Care Act covers 17 million people who never had health insurance or health coverage before, that's a good thing. Congresspersons who are fully covered with health insurance have denied the opportunity to 30 million others who they serve. And 30,000 people a year in this country die for sheer lack of health care. The American dream is not fully healthy so long as 40 families earn $97,000 an hour and other people are arrested for trying to expand their wage from $9 to $15. The best part of the Constitution, the best aspect of it, said Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, is that it can be amended. Here's a proposed amendment that never got realized, but listen to these words written in 1868. They're very much 4th of July words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal, that all are endowed with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, the fruits of their labor, and the pursuit of happiness. The fruits of their labor. The American dream does not mean confiscation of wages. It does not mean wages that are so low that body and soul can't be kept together. That dream is like a raisin in the sun. Justice for all means economic justice for all. To me, patriotism for the non-scoundrel involves making this American dream available to all Americans, black and white, Hispanic and Asian, men and women, gays, transgenders, lesbians, bisexuals, straights, Jews and Muslims, Christians, Hindus and Buddhists, and Unitarian Universalists. All God's children have a place in this choir, making the American dream available to young African American men in the inner city, to the farm worker receiving substandard wages, toiling in 100-degree plus weather, to the miner toiling in life-endangering conditions, making the dream real for these people will hasten to the day that our great country is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is non-scoundrel patriotism. And that is what we rightfully mean by America the Beautiful, in my view. It was well put by Woody Guthrie. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear friends. Maybe that 4th of July 41 years ago wasn't my happiest one. This one might be. Well, let's try to build a new way by turning to the hymn, Building a New Way, in the teal hymnal, which I don't have, 1017. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a Spirit of hope, help us to celebrate our diversities, guide us in hearing one another in our divisions. Grant that beginning in this community, we may know this Independence Day weekend and beyond that a just and faithful tomorrow begins here in our hearts. Amen.